Is the 223 cartridge loaded with 77 grain tipped Sierra Match King bullets adequate for hunting elk? Folks, that's what we're here to explore today, because there's a contingent of shooters who insist that it is. And man, I'm curious. I want to find out. I've been shooting 77 grain TMK bullets pretty much since the first lot rolled off the presses at Sierra. I found out that they're really accurate in my go-to Predator rifle. And so I've been using them for that. I use them for long range work on steel with an AR type rifle. In fact, I've run 8 out of 10 on 20-inch plates at 1,000 yards pretty consistently with my accurized AR. And at one point, I had a really good run. I hit a life-size steel coyote at 800 yards, 8 in a row. I was like, I'm out. I didn't want to try and run 10 shots. So anyway, I've devised a test that I think is the ultimate challenge for a 77 grain TMK bullet in the hunting scenario. So, you know, we all know that if you shoot something broadside and you just kind of pop a bullet through ribs, right? You got maybe an inch of meat, ½ inch of bone in there. That bullet's gonna go right through there, and then you're into vitals, right? And I like to say that lung tissue is just strong bubbles. You got a lot of air in there, some membranes, and there's just not a lot to impede the progress of a bullet. So yeah, even a little 77 grain TMK is gonna kill an elk if you pop it through the ribs broadside, especially inside practical hunting distances. That said, I actually have a friend whose son shot a nice 4x4 mule deer with cheaters inside 200 yards when he was 10 years old. It was his first buck. Placed his shot on the X, squarely through both lungs. It took him, if memory serves, a couple hours to find that deer because he went 200 yards and didn't bleed. He didn't have an exit wound. The trauma inside wasn't enough to cause him to start coughing blood. And when he died, he slid under a log and was really hard to see. And so they almost didn't find him. So anyway, I'm ambivalent. I'm doubtful about how good the 77 grain TMK is for elk. So I've gathered some challenging materials here, and let me talk you through what our process here is. The most challenging shot generally on an elk, and one of the most common you'll get, is when you come upon a bull in thick timber, and he is aware you're there, but he's not sure what you are yet. So he's on edge, but he'll look at you quartering to. So he's standing with the point of the shoulder facing straight at you. And you have to break that shoulder. You're gonna either go through the shoulder knuckle if you hit a little low and go for the heart shot, or through that really big, like wrist-sized bone that comes out of the shoulder knuckle above it, and drive your bullet back through his vitals at an angle. This is a super, super common shot on big bull elk. Lots of times you find them in timber. They're pretty savvy. As they get old, especially in over-the-counter units that get a lot of pressure on public land, they don't like being out in open country during daylight hours. Also, if you're calling them, if you're fortunate enough to have a rut hunt, you're very likely to get that quartering to presentation inside relatively close range. Well, savvy bullet guys know that the closer you are, the more your impact is going to stress your bullet, because you're getting more energy hitting that bullet in the face, more likely to cause it to pancake and even fragment out. When a bullet fragments, it doesn't penetrate well. The 77 grain TMK is a great bullet, super accurate. It's designed for target shooting and for certain military applications we won't get into. It has a thin jacket. There's no controlled expansion mechanism designed to keep it together, retain some mass, and drive deep, which is why I'm skeptical about it. So, enough verbal lather. Let's look at our materials. First, I've got a piece of actual elk hide, right? Okay. This is thick stuff. This is from the neck area on the front of an elk. Might as well be the shoulder, but I didn't have a shoulder piece to use. I think that's about 3/8 of an inch thick. It's hard to cut even with a very sharp knife, right? So we're gonna lay that over a 2-inch section of calibrated ballistic gelatin. Now this is clear ballistics gel, and it's actually I think what they typically call 10% gelatin that's used to simulate human tissue. I wish I had the 15% or 20% stuff that's used to simulate wildlife, because it's denser. It's actually harder to penetrate, but I don't, so I'm going to use what I have. We're going to lay our piece of elk hide over this piece of gelatin, right? Got to move our cartridge right here. That's to simulate the impact location of a bullet as it heads into the elk on the front of that shoulder. Next, and this is the real impediment right here, we're going to put a shoulder knuckle. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but that's a big contrast. Look at the difference in the size between that cartridge and this shoulder knuckle. Now, just in full disclosure, this is not an elk shoulder knuckle. This is a shoulder knuckle from an 18-month-old steer that I got from the local butcher shop. How does that relate to an elk shoulder knuckle? Well, an 18-month-old steer, prime for market, will weigh between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds. I have seen elk on the ground that will go close to 1,100. They're not common. Most of them are going to be 700-ish. But the giants, the type we all really hope to shoot, they're going to be close to 1,000 or more. Plus, let's throw moose into the mix. Lots of people are saying, oh, it's even good for moose, right? That 77 grain TMK bullet can kill anything on the North American continent. Well, a bison is a lot bigger than a moose, right? They're even saying it'll kill bison cleanly. A moose, a big Alaskan Yukon moose, will go 1,500 pounds plus. So I think using an 18-month-old beef shoulder knuckle is a reasonably good simulation. And there's one other factor. Beef bone, not being wildlife, they're raised in, pastures and feedlots. It's less dense, less of a challenge to a bullet. So anyway, it's actually kind of being kind to this bullet. And we're gonna just put that at whatever angle we can get it to prop up. I've got to put a bullet accurately through that, right? So now we've got hide. We've got 2 inches of gelatin simulating the muscle around a shoulder knuckle, right? Got my boning knife here to cut pieces. Now, if you're going through an elk's shoulder, quartering towards his vitals, inside that shoulder knuckle, there's about 6 to 8 inches of muscle, depending on your angle and the size of the bull. So we're going to put a section, we're being kind here, this is about 5 inches. It's not even 6 inches like an elk would be, but we're going to put a piece of gelatin there to simulate the muscle. Now, there's one other characteristic that we can't simulate with this, and I wish we could, and that's the surrounding mass of the muscle, the tendons and sinews and connective tissues, and the hide that keep that shoulder knuckle together even as the bullet drives through it. In this scenario, we may have big chunks of bone blow off that just get out of the bullet's way and quit exerting adverse effect on it. But there's really not much we can do about it. So we're going to move ahead with what it is. I'm going to cut an angle in this because when a bullet gets through the hide, the initial section of muscle, a shoulder, and then all that muscle between the shoulder and the ribs, it then impacts the ribs at an angle. They don't sit like that to the shoulder, right? They're sitting at an angle. So the bullet's got to usually break 2 ribs to get inside the vitals, right? We're going to do that. And then we're going to put another section of gelatin against the backside to simulate the vitals. That's a pretty challenging journey generally to get all the way through and into that vital cavity, which is kind of why we're doing this. So, gonna get busy here with this. I actually got to cut it off this one. Let's make sure we get the angle right. So, if this is a left front shoulder, we're gonna put the bone in like this. If it's a right front shoulder, we'll put it like this. That's what I'm going to do so the camera can actually pick up some of that. So I'm going to make this cut right here. Gelatin is weird stuff to cut. It's very, very rubbery. You want a good, sharp, thin knife to do this. It's got to have a pretty long blade too. Boning knife is about right. A fillet knife, something like that. All right, there we go. So with the 5 inches and maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches of this angle, we're closer to that distance you actually would expect to see. There, it'll stand up that way, between a shoulder knuckle and the ribs on an elk. And there we go. I'm guessing that bullet, if it travels in a straight line, is going to stop in this block right here, which is a very small section representative of vital cavity, right? But just to be sure, we're going to use one more section here and put another 8 inches or so of ballistic gelatin on the backside to make sure we catch that bullet. Now you're going to look at this and say, that's way bigger than an elk. Fact is, folks, it's not really much bigger than a full-size bull elk, especially if you count this as his lungs and his vital cavity, right? We've often measured 30 inches of penetration between a shoulder knuckle and the rear of the rib cage where that bullet comes to rest. Plus, this section right here is a little bit stretched out, right? You got layers. They're set up like dominoes instead of compressed all into one cohesive unit. So we're going to take a little B-roll, walk around this with the camera, and then set up and take the shot. There's the bullet. Small but fierce. Elk hide, little section of gelatin, shoulder knuckle, more gelatin to simulate muscle, ribs at an angle. We got 2 elk ribs right there. Those are actual elk ribs from a mature bull. And then we got a section of gelatin to hopefully catch that bullet. Let's take this shot and see how she does. I'm going to try and shoot right through the front of that shoulder knuckle, and I'm doing it at close range so I can place my shot carefully. All right, we've got an 18-inch barrel here. A lot of people are running suppressed, so I feel like that's fairly indicative of what somebody would use. Here we go, fire in the hole. Let's go see what she did. All right, it jumped pretty hard, which makes me wonder if I hit it in the right spot. Look at this. That is crazy. Entrance hide, after it went through the elk hide, look how much it blew up right there, and look at all the bullet fragments around the perimeter. This is in the first 2 inches of gelatin, okay? Now, the bone itself, whoo, I don't know if you can see that. There's, I didn't center that knuckle very well. Oh, actually I did. Did I? Centered it well enough. There's the backside. Nothing got through that knuckle. So here's a close-up at the shoulder knuckle, right? We'll try and get the sunlight on it. And you can see how that bullet blew it up, and all that black right there, that's lead, okay? It impacted like this, okay? Came through this, hit that, and pretty well blew apart. There's nothing in this one backing it, okay? And those go all the way through. So this was used, in a 32 H&R penetration test. So those are previous holes, right? If you can see that right there, there's not a shred of bullet in there. So what we have is kind of a convoluted long route getting here, because those 2 little streaks through there confused me a bit. We have a bullet that got massively bigger, lost a ton of fragments. You can see fragments spread in about a 3-inch circle in this initial 2 inches. After going through the elk hide, right? Then it hit that bone, and it blew up like a grenade on that shoulder bone, which is actually worse performance than I anticipated. I thought something would get through that shoulder bone. I thought some fragments would break it apart and manage to get through at least into this gelatin. I was curious to see if they got to the ribs. Didn't even get to the ribs. So what does that tell you? It tells you that you shouldn't shoot elk or moose on the shoulder with a 77 grain TMK. This also concerns me a little bit right here, where it blew up so much, and There's all these different bullet fragments scattered around. You can see how big the trauma is right there. And I can tell you what's happened is that bullet hitting this elk hide. Whoops, let's stack it the way it was. The bullet hitting this elk hide began to expand and was already expanding when it hit the gelatin. And it just grenaded, right? By the time it hit the bone, it was still kind of cohesive. You can see by the dark smear of lead right there in the center that there was still a bit of a mass of lead. But it wasn't enough to break through that bone. So I think we should do another one. I'm going to put the hide over this gelatin right here. Keep in mind, we've got two little straight, non-expanded penetrating paths through that from the 32 H&R we tested recently. We've got about 5 inches plus 2 inches, and then we got ribs and then a bunch more gelatin. This is a very, very simple, in fact, let's do this. We're going to take this one away completely. We're just going to say elk hide, ribs, and gelatin. I'm going to put this one on the back side to see, just in case we blow through that and there's a piece that carries on. I want to see how this does without the shoulder knuckle in the way. This is exciting stuff. Okay, we're going to do another test. This one's a lot milder. This will just simulate ribs, maybe a little bit of muscle, and straight into the vitals with a 77 grain TMK. Fire in the hole. All right, let's see what we got. Hide jumped off about 2 feet. Gelatin jumped off. Now this is the angled section. I'm going to reassemble this how it was, right? So this is indeed a bit better. There's the hole through the ribs, okay? So we contacted one rib at a slight angle, but not too much. It was laying like this. There was the gelatin right there, and then we had the hide on the front. Okay, perfect. So we can pretty well measure what we got. Okay, first, look at that. Copper fragment outside the gelatin, right? That's a piece of the bullet that's sprayed out. Now, I don't know if you can zoom in there and get enough light on it to see, but there are a lot of bullet chunks along the path in here. I can see them radiating out away from the wound path significantly. There's even one down in here. Now, in this piece right here is the primary portion of the bullet, and then there's a tiny fragment another 1.5 inches down or so. So if we were to make a very accurate but non-official measurement, including hide, that's 9 inches. Let's call it 12 inches to where the bulk of the bullet stopped. And then keep in mind those paths are from a previous test. There's a tiny fragment of lead right there. So I'm going to look at that and say, even on a broadside elk, just ribs, a little bit of muscle, vitals, I don't like my odds for getting all the way through both lungs into the far side of the thoracic cavity, especially if you hit some kind of dense organs like heart or liver. Let's dig that bullet out and see what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to go in from the top here and try and get this remaining shred of bullet with my Leatherman. You can see right here, there's just a pinhole, right? There are no shredding, fragmenting, radiating signs of trauma around that bullet. Now, if you can see it from the side, right, it's not as deep as it looks right there because just the tip of my Leatherman's already got to it. See if I can get a hold of it without scarring it too much and pull it out of there. We're going to leave some little fragments because this is pretty much just shreds. There, I got it. Okay, there's the remainder of our 77 grain TMK bullet. I think, is that the base or is this just a gnarled piece of jacket with some lead tangled in it? There you go. We'll lay it beside a cartridge. That's about the size of a pencil eraser, right? It's not exactly a sledgehammer. All right, we've kind of put together the hide, the initial slab of gelatin, the ribs, and then the slab that caught most of the fragments. So let's look at those, right? So first we got the hide, just a little pinhole, pretty traditional entrance hole. Expansion beginning here, and look at all the fragments caught inside that section of gel, right? This is kind of like that first slab we had in the first test, where there are fragments in about a 2-inch to 3-inch circle right there. On through the ribs. Didn't even break the one where it went through. It put a crack in it, and it put about a thumb-size hole through it. And then it was on into this gel block. But you can see, even though it's fragmenting off still quite a bit, it's not creating a big tearing temporary cavity right there. Took a little bit of blood, meat with it into that cavity, and pretty well fragmented into not much left in the next 4 to 6 inches. We have an answer, folks. Should you hunt elk or bigger big game with a 77 grain TMK in your 223? Personally, I don't think so. I certainly wouldn't risk a hunt that I have saved for years to go on, maybe a once in my lifetime kind of bull elk hunt in the Rocky Mountains. Elk are big, moose are bigger, bison are even bigger. You should probably consider what the wise old hunters of yore used to say, like Robert Rourke, use enough gun. Let's go have a look.